This is the beginning of section 1.2 on estimation and rounding. Let's review rounding numbers. Let's round each of these numbers to the nearest 10. We start with the number 34. 34, rounded to the nearest 10, will round down to 30. 217, rounded to the nearest 10, will round up to 220. 1,372, rounded to the nearest 10, would round to 1,370. Now let's go back, and let's round 217 and 1,372 to the nearest 100. 217 rounded to the nearest 100 would round down to 200. 1,372 rounded to the nearest 100 would round up to 1,400. Now finally, let's go back and round 1,372 to the nearest 1,000. In this case, it would round down to 1,000. Let's take a look at these numbers. 3.4, 2.17, and 1.372. Let's round each of them to the nearest tenth. Let's round each of them to the nearest whole number first. So in order to round to the whole number, we're going to look at the tenths place. So 3.4 would actually round down to 3.0. 2.17 would round down to 2.0. And 1.372 would round down to 1.0. Now let's go back. And let's round 2.17 and 1.372 to the nearest tenth. So 2.17 rounded to the nearest tenth would round up to 2.2. 1.372 rounded to the nearest tenth would round up to 1.4. Now we can go back, and we can round 1.372 to the nearest hundredth. In this case, 1.372 to the nearest hundredth would round to 1.37. As you may have noticed in those examples, understanding the place value chart is very important when rounding to certain place values. Let's take a look at these numbers and understand the place value chart. Let's start with A, which is the number 21. Now, 21 would occur right there. The 2 is in the tens place, and the 1 is in the ones place. There's no need for a decimal point because there are no place values after the decimal point. Part B is 314. 314 would have the 3 in the hundreds place, the 1 in the tens place, and the 4 in the ones place. $1,957 would have the 1 in the thousands place, but in the ones place of the thousands place, the 9 in the hundreds place, the 5 in the tens place, and the 7 in the ones place. Now we get into a big number. 598,762,323. So when using the place value chart, we're going to go to the millions column, and you can see it's broken into hundreds, tens, and ones. Well, 598 million, that means the 5 needs to go in the hundreds column of the millions column. 598,762,323. So now you can see the place value of each of those digits. Now we go to the number in part E. Most of us would read this number as 0.71823. Well, let's put it in the place value chart and then read it correctly. So we have a decimal point. We have a 0 in the ones place, a decimal point, and then we have 71823. Now, understanding the place value will allow us to read this number correctly. Instead of reading it as 0.71823, we would read this as 71,823 millionths. Because as you can see, the 3 is in the millionths place, the 2 is in the hundred thousandths place, the 8 in the thousandths place, the 1 in the hundredths place, and the 7 in the tenths place. Finally, part F is the number 51.47. 51.47. This number can also be read 51 and 47 hundredths because the 7 is in the hundredths place. So we've done some reviewing examples of rounding numbers. Here are the rules that you probably learned back in middle school, if not elementary school, for rounding numbers. First, look at the digit to the right of the digit where rounding is to occur. Next, if the digit is 5 or greater, round up to the next digit. If the digit is less than 5, round down. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. Number 1, round 37 and 21 each to the nearest 10. Well, let's start with 37. Since we're rounding it to the nearest 10, and we know that the 3 is in the tens place and the 7 is in the ones place, we're going to look at the 7 because it is the number to the right of the digit that we are rounding. Since 7 is greater than 5, we know that 37 rounds up to 40. Next we have the number 21. Once again, since we're rounding to the tens place and the 2 is in the tens place, we're going to look at the 1 because it is the digit to the right of the tens place. Since 1 is less than 5, we're going to round down to 20. Number 2. You purchased 5 items at the following prices: $2.59, $2.17, $3.65, 47 cents, and $5.79. The total bill was $18.67. Decide in your head whether this is reasonable. Well, one way to do this is to round the amounts of each of the 5 items. You could decide to round it to a couple different place values. Let's round each item to the nearest dollar. So if we take $2.59, since we're rounding it to the nearest dollar, we need to look at the 5 because it is to the right of the digit that we're rounding to. Since it's a 5, we're going to round $2.59 up to $3. Next we have $2.17. That'll round down to $2. $3.65 will round up to $4. 47 cents will round down to $0. And finally, $5.79 will round up to $6. Now, having rounded to the nearest whole dollar, we can add up the 5 items and decide whether $18.67 was a reasonable total. 3 and 2 is 5, and 4 is 9, and 9 and 6 is 15. $15 compared to $18.67. For 5 items, $18.67 seems a little too expensive compared to our $15 estimate. Just to double check, let's round each of our items to the nearest tenth. In this case, $2.59 would round to $2.60. $2.17 would round to $2.20. $3.65 would round to $3.70. 47 cents would round to 50 cents. And $5.79 would round to $5.80. Now let's add these up and find out our total. Adding these up, we end up with $14.80. So once again, we conclude that $18.67 is too large of a total bill. You can see that rounding each item to the nearest dollar was much easier to add up than rounding each item to the nearest tenth. This is good use of rounding to make a quick decision. Estimation is the process of arriving at an approximate answer to a question. The following symbol means approximately. It should be used anytime you are using rounding in a math problem. Estimation is a very useful daily skill. It can be used when making a grocery list to find out your total bill. It can be used to budget your daily bills, or it can be used to approximate house improvements. You want to purchase 5 items at the grocery store for the following prices: $12.59, $2.17, $23.65, $5.47, $5.79, $3.62, and $6.83. Do you have enough cash in your wallet to pay for these items? Well, as you saw in the previous example, one quick way to do this math is to round each item to the nearest dollar. Let's try this again. $12.59 rounded to the nearest dollar would round up to $13. $2.17 rounded to the nearest dollar would round to $2. $23.65 would round to $24. $5.47 would round to $6. Would round down to $5. $5.79 would round up to $6. $3.62 would round up to $4, and $6.83 would round up to $7. We've turned a complicated addition problem into a very simple one. We know that 13 plus 2 is 15, 24 plus 15 is 39, 39 plus 5 is 44, 44 plus 6 is 50, 50 plus 4 is 54, and 54 plus 7 is 61. So you will need to have at least $61 in your wallet in order to have enough cash to purchase these items. Here's another example. Estimate your monthly paycheck if you make $8.25 per hour and work an average of 13.75 hours a week. Well, let's apply some rounding. First, let's round our wage per hour. $8.25, we can call that $8 an hour. If we work an average of 13.75 hours a week, 13.75 can round up to 14 hours per week. Now, since the problem is asking us to estimate our monthly paycheck, we need to estimate how many weeks are in a month. Exactly, 4. Well, not exactly. Let's say approximately 4. Now we have some nice numbers that we can calculate our monthly paycheck. If we make $8 per hour and we work 14 hours per week, 14 times 4, 16, carry the 1, 56 hours per week we're working, and we're making $8 an hour. So 56 times 8 will give us our total monthly pay. 8 times 6 is 48. Put down the 8, carry the 4. Times 5 is 40, plus 4 is $448 per month. Once again, estimation has made what could be a more difficult calculation into a fairly simple problem. Here's another example. You're thinking of doing some home improvements, but need to make sure the $10,000 you've budgeted is enough money. You know that a new roof will cost $4,696, painting will cost $2,236, and new windows will cost $1,967. You want to do a quick calculation to make sure that you come under budget. So let's round to the nearest $1,000. 4,696 would round up to $5,000. 2,236 would round down to $2,000. 1,967 would round up to $2,000. 5,000 plus 2,000 plus 2,000 would be $9,000. Based on our quick rounding and estimation, you can be pretty confident that your home improvements will come in under budget. Here's our final example. We need to find a reasonable estimate of the following calculation. Now this calculation looks pretty rigorous, and the only way to do it would probably be to grab your calculator. However, using estimating, we can come up with a pretty good approximation. Let's look at how we can round these numbers into numbers that are easier to work with. Let's start with 0.47996. What would be an easy number to round that to? Exactly, 0.5. Next we have 88. Well, you could round that to 90. And finally, we have 0.249. Sure, 0.25. Now we've made the problem much easier. Let's find the approximate answer. 0.5 times 90. Well, that's the same as 1/2 times 90, or 1/2 of 90. So that would be 45. 45 divided by 0.25. Well, now you have to remember some math. 0.25 is the same as 1/4. And when we divide a number by a fraction, that's the same as multiplying it by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 1/4 is 4. So 45 times 4 is 180. We've taken a very difficult calculation and made it much more simple by rounding. Now understand that our answer of 180 isn't the exact answer, it is simply an approximation. So you have seen how estimation and rounding can be used to make math more simple. This concludes section 1.2.1, Estimation and Rounding.